In today's video, I want to take a look at the NHL standings and give you my thoughts and predictions on which teams are going to make the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Now, many of these teams are already confirmed and have clinched their playoff spots, but we still have some very exciting races coming down the stretch here, so we're going to take a look at the schedule that's remaining and which teams I think are going to clinch a spot. We'll get into all that coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. We have just over a week remaining in the NHL schedule, and some of these playoff races are going to come right down to the wire here to see who gets in. So let's start by taking a look at the current standings. We'll get started here with the Eastern Conference. Now, in the Metropolitan Division, the defending Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals do have their playoff spot clinched. They still are trying to finish first in the Metropolitan Division, although it's not a guarantee at this point, but they do have a 3-point lead on the second place Islanders and a 5-point lead on the third place Penguins. So all the likelihood here, the Washington Capitals more than likely do finish in first place here. The odds are certainly pretty good. Like I said, the Islanders are in second with 97, and the Penguins are in third at 95. But the Penguins do have one extra game remaining on both the Capitals and the Islanders here. So it wouldn't be a complete shocker to see some change in positions, possibly with even Pittsburgh having a shot here at moving up and maybe passing the Islanders. But I do think the odds of these three teams remaining in the top three spots heading into the playoffs are extremely good, but we'll get into my predictions here momentarily. In the Atlantic Division, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning well out in front, top team in the NHL. Not only have they clinched their division title, but they also have clinched the President's Trophy. They're having a phenomenal season, and I think many would predict that they would most likely be your odds-on favorite for the Stanley Cup based on such a dominating regular season. But of course, as we know, a solid regular season does not always mean a Stanley Cup victory, and there's a little bit of a President's Trophy curse that might be going on, as it's not very common that a team have finished first, won that trophy, and went on to win the Stanley Cup. Also in second place here, we have the very solid Boston Bruins, 103 points. Each of those teams now have 5 games remaining. The third place Toronto Maple Leafs also have 5 games remaining as well, and they sit in third place with 97 points. So it's pretty safe to say these three teams will be, in fact, the 1, 2, 3 spots. As we head into the playoffs, I don't see anything changing at all. They're obviously going to be your top 3 teams, and the positions they're in today are more than likely, but 99% sure that's how they will finish. Now, of course, the big playoff race here mainly is for your 2 wildcard spots. Currently, we have the Carolina Hurricanes with 77 games played, which means they have 5 games left at 91 points. We have the Columbus Blue Jackets in the number 2 wildcard spot at 77 games played with 90 points. And, of course, we have the Montreal Canadiens just outside now after last night. They have 78 games played, so they only have 4 left. And they also have 90 points. Of course, the Blue Jackets and the Habs did battle last night in a very, very crucial game for both clubs. And the Blue Jackets came ahead with a big victory there, beating Montreal by a 6-2 score. Not only did that big victory for the Columbus Blue Jackets put them into a tie with Montreal, but it put them ahead of them technically because they now hold the tiebreaker as well. So the Montreal Canadiens, with 1 fewer game left on the schedule, is going to have no choice here but to outperform the Columbus Blue Jackets down the stretch. It's going to be very difficult for them to get in. That was a crucial game for the Habs last night, and unfortunately they came up a little bit short. Now let's jump over here and take a look at the Western Conference standings. Obviously right now we have a dogfight in the Central Division for positioning. We have the Winnipeg Jets in first place with 94 points. Of course, they haven't been the greatest down the stretch here. They have had their struggles for sure. Might be good for them to get that out of the way now. And they have also had a lot of injuries. So as these players come back, we'll see if we get the true Winnipeg Jets for the playoffs. Hopefully for their sake that's the case. Otherwise, they may not have as long of a run as they did last year. The Nashville Predators sit in second place with 92 points. And of course, the St. Louis Blues have 90 points in third place. Now, the key thing here is the Blues have a game in hand on both the Jets and the Predators. The Jets and Predators have 5 games remaining, whereas the Blues have 6 games. So considering the point gap there, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they finish in the order they currently sit today, but at the same time, it wouldn't be a complete shocker to maybe even see St. Louis get up into second place or one of those two teams between the Preds or the Blues, possibly even catch the Winnipeg Jets. I think it's really important here for Winnipeg to kind of get their act together down the stretch, make sure they hang on to that first place position so that they can get a much more favorable opening round matchup here. But I guess time will tell. But that's going to be very interesting to division to watch here. You know, obviously over in the Pacific, it's a very different story. I think we're pretty much set on the three teams and the order, just like we have in the East with the Atlantic Division. The Flames are in first place with 5 games left with 101 points. The Sharks sit in number 2 spot with 5 games left as well at 95 points. So more than likely are not going to catch the Flames. And then you get the Vegas Golden Knights in third place with 90 points, also with 5 games left. The wildcard race does make things very interesting though. The Dallas Stars look to be reasonably safe, but they do have more games played. They played 78 games, which leaves them 4 left, and they sit with 88 points with a 5-point gap over the next wildcard team, the Colorado Avalanche, with 5 games remaining at 83 points. And of course, the teams battling that are still kind of in the mix here, we have the Coyotes and the Minnesota Wild, both with 77 games played. The Coyotes have 81 points and the Wild have 79. So obviously the odds are certainly against Minnesota, but it's not completely rule out here the possibility that they could work their way in. Now I want to take a quick look at the remaining schedule for the teams battling out for the wildcard spots, and I'll give you my thoughts and predictions on where they're going to finish. Now heading back to the Eastern Conference, let's take a look at the remaining schedule for the 3 teams battling it out there. You've got the Columbus Blue Jackets first up. They got 5 games left. They play the Nashville Predators, the Buffalo Sabres, the Boston Bruins, the New York Rangers, and the Ottawa Senators. So obviously out of their 5 games remaining, 2 of them are playoff teams and 3 of them are non-playoff teams. So therefore you would think the Blue Jackets to win 3 out of 5 shouldn't be too difficult. I guess you never know. It's easier said than done, but they do have a pretty decent schedule here down the stretch. Of course, the Columbus Blue Jackets sit with 90 points, currently in wildcard spot number 2, 1 point behind the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, of course, they also have the same number of games played as the Hurricanes, so let's take a look at who they have to play here down the stretch as well. The Carolina Hurricanes have a game against the Philadelphia Flyers coming up. Then they play the Pittsburgh Penguins on the road, as well as the Maple Leafs on the road. They return home to play the New Jersey Devils, and then they head back out on the road for the final game to play the Flyers one more time. Now, of course, with the Carolina Hurricanes, that means also they have 3 out of 5 games against non-playoff teams. The game against the Penguins and the Leafs likely going to be much tougher. I would think, though, when they do play Toronto, they more than likely get Garrett Sparks in the net, which might give them, a little bit of an advantage instead of facing Freddie Anderson, who's obviously the better goaltender. That might, possibly give them a slight edge, but still, Toronto's a tough team regardless of who's in the net. Next up, let's take a look at the Montreal Canadiens, who are now on the outside looking in and also have 1 fewer game to get this accomplished here after that big loss to the Blue Jackets last night. They now go on to play the Winnipeg Jets on the road for their next game. Then they're home against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then they go on the road to play the defending Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals and return home to finish things up against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's 4 out of 4 against not only playoff teams, but 3 out of 4 teams that are in first place in their division. And then you have a very solid Maple Leaf team. Even though they're in third place, they're one of the league's top teams. Now let's jump over here and take a look at the Western Conference teams battling it out for their wild card spots and have a look at who they have to play down the stretch here. The Colorado Avalanche play the Arizona Coyotes, who's nipping at their heels here. That's obviously going to be a huge game for both clubs. The winner of that game very well might end up getting a spot. I mean, if the Coyotes were to win that, that would kind of close that 2-point gap. They obviously have the same number of games played down the stretch here as well, so that's going to be very, very huge matchup for both clubs. The Colorado Avalanche then play the St. Louis Blues on the road. They return home to play 2 games, one against the Oilers and 1 against the Winnipeg Jets. Then they finish up on the road against the San Jose Sharks. That gives the Avalanche 2 games against non-playoff teams and 3 games that are against playoff teams down the stretch. So either way, the Avalanche schedule isn't too bad, but with a 2-point lead against the Coyotes and a game coming up against them, that game is going to be absolutely huge. Now let's jump over and take a look at the remaining schedule for the Coyotes, who, like the Avalanche, have 5 games left, and obviously they have that big game coming up against the Avalanche first up. Then they play the Minnesota Wild, who's the next team on their heels as well. Then they play the Los Angeles Kings. Both of those games against the Wild and the Kings are at home. Then they finish up on the road with 2 consecutive games, one against the Vegas Golden Knights and then the Winnipeg Jets. So they certainly have a fairly tough schedule. But again, like Colorado, 2 games against non-playoff teams and 3 games against playoff teams. And really, all of them will not be easy. So I would say if the Avalanche beat the Coyotes in a head-to-head matchup, that should solidify things for them. Now, of course, the Minnesota Wild, the other team here, kind of coming down the stretch. They play Vegas Golden Knights coming up next year on the road. Then they also play the Coyotes, as we just saw on their schedule. Then they are home to the Winnipeg Jets and the Boston Bruins and finish up against the Dallas Stars. So Minnesota has the biggest mountain to climb in the West. They're already 4 points out, and the only team that they have to play that's not currently a playoff team is the Arizona Coyotes. So I do think the Minnesota Wild schedule is just going to prove to be too tough to really battle their way and overcome a 4-point deficit there. It's just not very likely at all. Now, of course, the Dallas Stars currently sit in wildcard 1 with 88 points and do look to be relatively safe as of right now. Now, in the Eastern Conference, we're going to have the #1 overall team, the Tampa Bay Lightning, battling the Columbus Blue Jackets. I do have the Blue Jackets beating out the Montreal Canadiens because of that big victory last night. They have an extra game left on the schedule, and they do have an easier schedule, in my opinion, as well. That final game of the year against Ottawa, with that big trade and a first-round pick on the line and that Duchesne trade, could certainly prove to be very interesting as well if things don't go quite here how I've predicted them to be. But Montreal, I just think it's going to be too tough. That game last night was just too important. They dropped the ball, and just the schedule, it's just not in their favor. So I do think the Blue Jackets will squeak in here as wildcard 2 and play the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round. Now, of course, the other matchup in that Atlantic Division is going to see the Boston Bruins face the Toronto Maple Leafs. No big surprises there, but hopefully we'll be in for another epic 7-game battle. Those two teams have put on a couple of recent playoff performances that have been ones for the ages, very entertaining to watch. So let's hope that we get another one of those. Over in the Metropolitan Division, we're going to have the defending Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals doing battle with wildcard team #1, who I have in as being the Carolina Hurricanes. Again, like the Blue Jackets, I think they're going to have a more favorable schedule here down the stretch and are going to beat out the Montreal Canadiens for those last 2 spots. So you're going to have the Hurricanes and Blue Jackets in. The Habs will be out, but it won't be by much. Now, of course, the other matchup in the Metropolitan Division will feature the New York Islanders battling the Pittsburgh Penguins. Obviously, that's going to be an epic matchup here as well. The Islanders would love to make some noise in the playoffs after having a way better than expected regular season. And instead, we look back to many years ago when the Islanders were a surprise playoff team back in the early 90s when they upset the Pittsburgh Penguins. Maybe we could see a repeat of that as they maybe go on a little bit of a run here. But I guess time will tell. We'll see how much juice the Penguins have left in the tank here. Obviously, they know how to win. They've got all kinds of leadership, lots of winning pedigree on that team, so it's certainly going to be no easy matchup for the Isles. Now let's take a look at my predictions for the Western Conference and how those matchups are going to line up. I do have the Winnipeg Jets hanging on by a thread here to finish first in their division, in the Central Division, and will play the Dallas Stars. They will be the wildcard team #1. Obviously, the Jets will be the second-ranked team in the Western Conference, behind the Flames, who will currently hold down #1 spot in the Western Conference right now. The Jets and Stars will certainly do battle here in round 1. Now, of course, one thing that's going to be interesting about that series is it's fair to say Connor Hellebuyck hasn't had his best season this year after everything that happened last year, taking the Jets deep in the playoffs, got a new big contract. He hasn't been terrible, but he certainly hasn't been his best either. Hopefully he brings his A game. And of course, recently with the Dallas Stars, we saw another injury to Ben Bishop. So goaltending, as we know in the playoffs, is of uttermost importance, and that very well could prove to be the difference in that series. If the Jets can't get that top line for the Stars shut down and can't get a good performance out of Hellebuyck, the Stars might give them more trouble than one might expect, but I would think that the Winnipeg Jets, as strong as they are, should be able to get through round 1. Of course, the other matchup we're going to see in the Central is the Predators against the Blues. It's certainly going to be very interesting to see there. Would not be surprising to see the St. Louis Blues end up with home ice advantage even over the Predators. The Predators certainly have been lacking this year when it comes to special teams. They have the worst power play in the NHL, and typically that's another big factor in the playoffs. Not only goaltending, but special teams are absolutely critical, and they very well might end up going down early, even though they've had such a strong year again, and by many predicted to go far in the playoffs. Wouldn't be surprising to see the Blues maybe upset the Predators, but we'll get into those a little deeper once the matchups are actually set here. Jumping over to the Pacific Division, like I said, like the Atlantic, the 1, 2, 3 spots are pretty much confirmed, and I do have the Calgary Flames doing battle with the Avalanche in round 1. Like as I said here back the last time we did a prediction video about 3 to 4 weeks ago, I said the Colorado Avalanche were going to get things done and score their way in. Even though I had concerns about the team, I said they're going to hang on, and it looks like that's just setting up pretty nicely to happen here. Of course, they've been without Captain Gabriel Landeskog, who looks to be returning earlier than expected and could play this week and get in the last couple games of the season, which will be absolutely huge for them as well. Not only does he complete that top line with McKinnon and Rantanen, he's their captain, gives them great leadership, and they haven't been quite the same without him, even though they've been finding ways to kind of hang on and get some points down the stretch here. But they're certainly missing him big time, and will need him if they have any hope on having a chance against the very strong Calgary Flames. Of course, the other matchup, with no surprise, will be the Sharks battling the Vegas Golden Knights. And again, like I mentioned with some of the other teams here like Winnipeg and Dallas, the San Jose Sharks, even though they're built as a contending team, acquired Erik Karlsson, lots of veterans there that need to win, but I don't have a lot of confidence in their goaltending down the stretch. Martin Jones has not been good this year. Aaron Dell hasn't been the best either in his backup role. Previously he was one of the better backups in the league, and his stats have suffered a little bit this year as well. So the goaltending has to be there. Otherwise, they're going to be outdueled by Marc-Andre Fleury, Mark Stone, etc. They're not going to be an easy task to beat Vegas. They lost to them in the playoffs last year, and we very well might see a repeat of that. And unfortunately, the Sharks and all their veterans and star players might be going out for an early exit if they can't get Martin Jones playing up to snuff here and getting into his better game as the playoffs approach. So those are my playoff predictions for the teams that are going to make it. Obviously, some critical matchups going down the stretch here to see who gets in. That game last night between the Blue Jackets and the Habs in the Eastern Conference was critical, and I think that very well might be the difference in the season between the Blue Jackets and the Habs making the playoffs here. I just think the Habs have too tough of a schedule down the stretch. I think the Carolina Hurricanes and the Blue Jackets make that playoff matchups there. Now, of course, with the Carolina Hurricanes, Justin Williams announced on Twitter yesterday that they're not going to be doing the Storm Surge anymore. They're kind of getting rid of it here with a few games left in the regular season, which was very surprising. And to be honest, a little bit disappointing. I hope they don't jinx themselves here by getting rid of that. It's been a really fun experience for their fans this year. I can understand maybe not doing it in the playoffs, but they're not there yet. And hopefully they don't jinx themselves down the stretch. Obviously, over in the Western Conference, it's a little bit less of a matchup. You only have one spot really up for grabs with the Dallas Stars basically holding down wildcard one pretty solid. But the Avalanche are going to be my pick here yet again to squeak their way in, especially with a returning Landeskog. Hopefully this week to kind of solidify things here down the stretch. Now, of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions. What are your predictions on these playoff matchups? Who do you see getting in for the wildcard spots? And what do you think the first round matchups are going to look like? Feel free to even give some predictions on who do you think is going to get out of the first round as well. Once we know that the playoff matchups are absolutely set, we would be doing preview videos along with predictions, and I'll give you my predictions all the way through the playoffs. Obviously, just for fun, we'll see here how much we can predict the future and see who can be right and have a lot of fun with it here down the stretch as we get ready for the playoffs, the most exciting time of the year in the NHL. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up before you go. I would appreciate it if you did. Thank you for watching. We will catch you next time.